Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back. It's so wonderful to have you here with us tonight. Go ahead and let yourself settle down into your favorite sleeping position. Adjust your pillows, pull your blankets up exactly as you like them, and let the weight of the day begin to lift from your shoulders. I wanted to share a little thought with you about why I chose to write this particular story for us tonight. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the old heirloom fables we used to listen to when we were small. The ones with beautifully dressed woodland characters, quiet village lanes, and small, gentle mysteries that always left you feeling entirely safe. I wanted to bring that exact feeling back for us tonight. In a world that often moves far too fast, we deserve a place that moves with absolute patience. A place where the greatest event of the season is simply the arrival of something kind and beautifully made. So tonight, we're visiting a story of pure comfort, tailored just for you. Before we begin our walk down to the village hall, let us take a slow, comforting breath together, breathing in that quiet evening air, holding it gently for a moment, and now letting it go with a soft, long sigh. Feel your eyelids growing just a little bit heavier. Let the muscles in your face soften, and let my voice guide you into the peaceful twilight. The daylight had ebbed away in shades of elderberry and plum, leaving the valley tucked beneath a heavy, shifting tide of moorland mist. It was a damp, quiet fog that smelled of cold river stones and wet bracken, softening the sharp edges of the thatched roofs and curling low around the roots of the sleeping willows. Down the spine of the village lane, Roscoe and the bunnies moved with a rhythmic, easy pace. The gravel crunched softly underfoot, a dry, steady sound that seemed to measure out the stillness of the evening. Chimneys along the lane were beginning to clear their throats, sending up thin blue ribbons of peat smoke that hung suspended in the heavy air like spun wool. When they reached the porch of the old parish hall, a sturdy stone structure covered in pale green lichen, Millie Moonbeam paused. Her ears, long and velvety, swept back to catch the faint rustle of the oak leaves above. "Look," she breathed, her voice barely carrying past her whiskers. There, resting squarely upon the damp flagstone step beneath the copper wall lantern, sat a long, substantial bundle. It was a package of deliberate, old-fashioned workmanship, bound tight in coarse hessian that still smelled of the loom, and cinched with 3 neat running hitches of hemp twine. Roscoe dropped to one knee, the hem of his coat brushing the stone. He pressed a palm against the rough fabric. No ink had marked the wrapping, no seal of wax declared its origin. Yet a quiet knowing settled over his face, his shoulders dropping as he exhaled a long cloud of pale breath into the chilly air. Every year, precisely when the damp of autumn turned the oak leaves to copper, this solitary offering appeared on the stone. The old folk spoke of a solitary weaver who lived up in the high hidden valleys where the badgers dug their sets, a creature who gathered the darkness of the midnight sky and wove it into thread. Working in unison, the bunnies wedged their small paws beneath the weight of the bundle. With a collective, careful heave, they helped Roscoe lift the great parcel, their breath coming in even rhythms as the heavy oak doors groaned open, swallowing them into the cool, cavernous dark of the hall. The great hall swallowed them into a vast, cool stillness that smelled comfortingly of centuries-old beeswax, dry kindling, and the faint, sweet dust of the linen press. It was a space built to hold the winters of 100 years. Roscoe laid the heavy bundle across the centre of the grand harvest table, a massive slab of English oak, seasoned by time and scrubbed until the pale grain felt as smooth as a river-worn pebble. Moving with quiet cooperation, the bunnies struck long cedar splinters against the hearthstones, carrying the tiny yellow flames to a row of thick tallow candles set in heavy brass saucers. As the amber light bloomed, casting long, lazy shadows up into the vaulted timber rafters, the iron latch of the outer door gave a slow, familiar clink. In from the damp lane slipped Marlowe Badger and Huxley Harpsichord, their dense silver coats beaded with tiny diamonds of mist that glittered in the new warmth. Behind them loomed Shepherd Rumpelwool, wrapped in a huge oil lanolin smock that instantly made the draughty corners of the hall feel tight and secure. They had seen the high-arched windows flush with gold and knew the valley's great secret had arrived. Marlowe Badger stepped to the table, his dark eyes bright behind his wire-rimmed spectacles. From his deep waistcoat pocket he produced a pair of heavy black iron tailor shears, the finger loops worn smooth from generations of use. With a deliberate, measured movement, he slipped the lower blade beneath the twine. Snip! The hemp parted with a dry, throaty snap, coiling away on the oak boards. Roscoe and Huxley peeled back the stiff, crackling layers of coarse brown paper, folding them outward like the petals of a winter rose, until the heart of the parcel lay fully bare. A low, collective murmur, half a sigh, half a breath of pure reverence, rippled through the small group. Resting on the paper was a magnificent, towering bolt of the most exquisite deep pile velvet ever spun. It was an impossible fabric. The colour was not merely dyed, it was caught. In the shadow it was the bottom of a deep woodland well. Where the candlelight touched it, it rippled into the glowing sapphire of a midsummer twilight. It seemed to possess its own weight and its own stillness, absorbing the room's small noises into its thick, downy nap. Millie Moonbeam extended a tentative paw, her small pink pads sinking deep into the plush pile. It was softer than the underside of a swan's wing, denser than the thickest cushion of moss hiding in the deep dales. Berry and Caratina traced the heavy, tightly woven edge, marvelling at the sheer substance of the cloth. As it warmed in the candle glow, it released the faint, sleepy scent of wild thyme and dried bog myrtle, the unmistakable signature of the high ferns. For a long, meditative stretch, the little company stood entirely motionless, bound by a quiet gratitude. This was the valley's anchor, a silent, anonymous gift designed for no other purpose than to wrap the village in absolute comfort before the first hard frost locked the soil. As the hearth warmth began to push the chill back into the stone walls, the heavy oak doors groaned open once more, admitting a small procession of the valley's tiny residents, who moved with the unhurried grace of those already thinking of their nests. First came the field mice, marigold mixtint and Mabel seedling, walking shoulder to shoulder beneath the weight of a shallow willow work-basket. Inside, arranged with great care upon a scrap of faded scarlet flannel, lay their treasures, miniature silver thimbles that caught the candle flicker like stray sparks, rows of turned boxwood spools wound with fine silk, and a plump, sun-faded pincushion shaped like a windfall strawberry. Behind them bobbed old Thimbley Whisker, his long grey whiskers twitching as the rich, comforting scent of the velvet met his nose. He cradled a small, battered tin of antique brass pins, their glass heads clinking softly together like tiny pebbles in a stream. Sorrel Otter arrived last, marking his entrance with a slow, contented nod toward Shepherd Rumplewool. He bore no needles. Instead, his webbed paws held a huge copper kettle, its lid rattling gently against the steam rising from within. He had spent the twilight simmering a dark brew of chamomile, dried elderberries, and spiced plum over his own peat fire. When he set the heavy kettle down upon an iron trivet at the table's end, the deep, dull thud seemed to anchor the entire room in absolute safety. The bunnies moved efficiently and silently, pulling up heavy, high-backed ash chairs and positioning footstools so the smaller mice could see over the table. Caratina began sorting the silk spools, laying them out by shade, from the pale, smoky greys of dawn to the deep, ink-rich indigos that matched the great bolt of cloth. An ancient, unspoken understanding ruled the hall. There was no chatter, no bustling haste. The appearance of the work-baskets was the signal for the great winter mending, a time of slow, rhythmic, purposeful handiwork, where every stitch carried the memory of previous winters kept safe against the wind. Marlow Badger took his place at the head of the oak slab, his silver and black features cast in sharp relief by the nearest tallow flame. With a slow, deliberate reach, he fished deep into his tweed coat and drew out a long, yellowed measuring tape, its numerical markings scratched in an elegant script from an age long gone. He aligned the tape with the edge of the midnight velvet. Huxley Harpsichord stood opposite, his broad paw pressing the fabric flat against the grain of the oak to keep it true. The silence in the hall deepened, turning thick and heavy, broken only by the lazy, intermittent pop of the applewood logs in the hearth, and the sleepy, rhythmic sigh of the north wind testing the leaded glass windows. Marlowe raised the iron shears. He notched the blades against the crisp edge of the cloth. Then, with a steady, unhurried pressure of his paw, the metal parted the dense weave. The sound was immensely satisfying, a deep, clean, woolly whisper that felt like a physical comfort in the ear. The heavy iron blades moved with absolute certainty, leaving a line as clean and straight as a frozen furrow. Marlowe moved down the length of the table, measuring by the ancient standard of the valley. He passed the heavy shears to Roscoe, who took up the task with the same patient, hypnotic cadence. Each square was cut with a large, generous hand, sized so that whether you were a badger or a harvest mouse, you received a substantial portion of the weaver's star-cloth. The bunnies watched with heavy, blinking eyes. Berry kept count as the indigo squares were stacked into a soft, velvety pyramid in the center of the table. One for the shepherd, one for the harpsichordist, and tiny, perfectly scaled fragments for the mice. When Roscoe handed Millie Moonbeam her square, she pressed the cool, heavy textile against her cheek. It possessed a wonderful, comforting substance, clean, square, and entirely hers. Neighbours passed the pieces down the line, their furred paws brushing in the dim light, exchanging those quiet, knowing smiles that require no words. The gift of the high ferns was now divided, ready to become part of the valley's daily warmth. With their individual portions of velvet cradled safely, the company retreated from the draughts of the long table, drawing their stools into a tight crescent moon around the great stone hearth. The fireplace, built of massive river boulders, held 3 great logs of old orchard applewood that burned with a steady, deep orange heart, radiating a heavy, enveloping heat that made the ears droop and the muscles soften. Shepherd Rumplewool unrolled a thick wool rug directly on the flags, his long, shaggy, cream-coloured coat drinking in the firelight. The mice settled their work baskets along a low granite ledge that had been warmed by the chimney breast. Slowly, without a single motion wasted, the mending commenced. Every resident had brought their oldest, most trusted winter garment, heavy russet tweeds, thick drab wools, and stiff corduroy jackets that smelled of old hay and rain. Now they were to be fortified. Marigold and Mabel worked in perfect silent harmony. Marigold held the indigo velvet square flat against the frayed elbow of Mabel's moss-green cardigan, while Mabel drew a long, slow needleful of silk through the wool. Thimbley Whisker sat cross-legged on his chair, his tiny paws working with minute precision as he anchored a protective velvet patch over the pocket of his miniature waistcoat. The sounds within the circle became an absolute lullaby. The hall was filled with the soft, repetitive friction of country textiles, the long, rhythmic swoosh of silk thread migrating through heavy tweed, the metallic clack of a silver thimble driving a needle home, and the low, percussive hiss of sap boiling from the applewood. Roscoe leaned forward, his fingers guiding the needle with surprising delicacy as he helped Berry trim the cuffs of his small gardening coat. Next to them, Caratina's chin was already dipping toward her chest, her eyelids trembling as she watched Millie Moonbeam's needle rise and fall, leaving a row of tiny uniform silver points that looked like frost settling on dark soil. Sorrel Otter ladled the steaming plum tea into heavy stoneware mugs, passing them hand to hand without a sound. The rich, fruity steam mingled with the dry fragrance of the hearth, creating an atmosphere so thick with security that the winter outside felt like a myth told in another country. There was no thought of the morrow, no anxiety for the frost. There was only the heavy wool in their laps, the steady travel of the needle, and the absolute certainty that they were together. By the time the last needles were returned to their flannel beds, a deep, immovable calm had claimed the room. The bunny's ears hung like day-old parsley over their shoulders. The field mice moved with the slow, heavy caution of clockwork toys winding down. Work baskets were latched with dull wooden thuds, and the villagers drifted out into the grey lavender mist, their lanterns mere smudges of gold as they sought their respective cottages. Roscoe and the bunnies moseyed up the lane toward their cottage, their boots finding the path by instinct. The valley was utterly silent, held fast in the mist's cool embrace. When Roscoe pushed open the thick timber door of the cottage, the damp air stayed on the threshold, replaced instantly by the deep, residual baking warmth of the kitchen stove. The rooms were silent, illuminated only by the sleepy crimson eye of the turf embers, casting long, soft shadows across the pine floorboards. Before the stairs could be climbed, there remained the final small ritual of the night. The damp walk had left them a little hollow, and their tumblingtons required that small, warm comfort that ensures an unbroken sleep. Moving slowly, Roscoe touched a splinter to the oil lamp on the dresser, its wick blossoming into a low, honey-coloured glow that turned the hanging copper pans into shining moons. Berry reached into the willow bin and fetched a heavy, grey-skinned winter squash and 3 small, shriveled orchard apples, setting them on the thick sycamore chopping block. Roscoe took his heavy, wooden-handled knife. With care and patience he split the squash. The blade met the wood with a soft, hollow thwack. The split halves revealed a deep, gold-orange flesh that smelled of the summer earth. He turned to the apples, the knife shearing through the skins with a crisp, clean crunch, releasing a sharp, nostalgic sweetness into the warm kitchen. By the cast-iron range, Caratina took up a long ladle. In a blue stoneware pot, a rich broth of roots and winter herbs had been steeping since noon. With a heavy arm, she began to move the ladle in slow, clockwise circles. The sound of the thick, savoury liquor moving against the glaze was a liquid metronome for the sleepy room. She dropped in a few sage leaves and a few grains of rock salt, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud that smelled of roasted parsnips and celery root. Millie Moonbeam fetched 4 shallow bowls from the dresser, her small paws ensuring the ceramic didn't clatter, placing each down on the scrubbed pine table with a gentle clink. Beside them she laid 4 heavy pewter spoons, dull and cool to the touch. Roscoe ladled the food when it was cooked with a slow, generous hand. A pool of the golden broth, a soft wedge of the steamed squash, and the sweet, collapsed ribbons of the apple. They sat at the old table, the chairs giving a short, lazy scrape against the floor. Not a word was spoken. They preserved the great silence of the night. They ate slowly, letting each warm, savoury spoonful soothe their throats and spread a radiant, heavy heat through their chests and down into their tumblingtons. With every slow swallow, the last tension of the long walk dissolved. Their limbs grew leaden, their shoulders dropped, and an inescapable drowsiness wrapped around them like a heavy wool blanket. When the bowls were cleared, Roscoe wiped the table with a soft flannel cloth, and the bunnies let out one final deep, communal sigh. Their bodies were filled, their chests were warm, and the night was waiting. One by one, the bunnies wended their way upstairs, where the great feather beds stood high and white in the gloom. The deep, down-filled mattresses looked impossibly soft, plumped up like summer clouds. Millie Moonbeam slipped between the linen sheets, her small frame sinking instantly into the deep down until the bed rose up around her, shaping itself to her body. She pulled the heavy patchwork quilt, now bearing its fresh indigo square of velvet, right to her chinnigan. Beside her, Berry and Caratina burrowed into their own beds, shifting twice before settling into the deep, pillowy silence. Roscoe climbed into his own bed, letting his body find the absolute center of the mattress. He closed his eyes, listening to the faint, dry rustle of the straw below and the slow, comforting breathing of the bunnies around him. The midsummer tailor had come and gone. The coats were stout against the frost, and the cottage was cosy and warm. As you let your own eyes close fully now, and you sink into the absolute support of your bed, let these gentle thoughts wrap around you like a blanket of soft velvet. I am safe and I am warm. My hands are at rest and my day is complete. I can let go of the world now. Everything is taken care of. My mind is clearing, becoming as quiet as the midnight sky. I am surrounded by comfort, inside and out. I give myself permission to fully drift away. I am protected. I am at peace. I am ready for sleep. Let the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing carry you deeper and deeper into the quiet dark. The mending is done. The village is asleep. And you are completely safe. All was snug. All was well. Night.